So moving into introductions, I am Rob Warren, Managing Director of Conservation with the trustees. And partly because, well, just for longitudinal context, I started my conservation career with the Mass Department of Fish and Game and spent a number of years with the Habitat Protection Program there. I was then with the Nature Conservancy for many years, again, doing my conservation work across Massachusetts, and joined the trustees just over 8 years ago. The negotiation challenge I wanted to mention is, well, it was a project working on the conservation of a summer sleepaway camp. And the leader of the team for the camp was very focused on their longevity. They were going to be on this property forever, as far as they could tell. From the land trust side, we were looking at this property and thinking, well, someday maybe they'll fold their business and the land will be able to be kind of returned more to a natural state. But we were looking at all the buildings on the property and thinking, man, how are we ever going to make that happen? And we were stuck on this among a few other issues. And one particular day, we had a meeting in the morning and we're all heading out to lunch to grab some lunch together. And literally as we're heading through the restaurant door, I said to the head of the camp team, you know, if you guys would just put up the money now to take down those buildings later, then we could probably break through this and we could get this thing done. And he just stopped still and looked at me and said, well, we can do that. And there we were, we worked it out. Our concern was addressed because we had a financial solution for addressing the situation. From the camp's perspective, they really thought they would be there forever and it would never cost them a dime to make that promise. So from there, we worked it out. The point I want to draw out of that for this moment is that first, don't be shy of floating kind of outlier ideas. You never quite know how they're going to fit into somebody else's thinking. Be ready for rejection. But I think that beyond the fringe thought that may come to you when you're looking at the situation may just, it may not be the answer, but it may lead to the next thing that is the answer that helps kind of unlock that stuck moment. And second, don't be afraid of a little humor. Again, it might be rejected, it might fall flat, but at the right moment, in the right way, right? That wasn't across the table, that was as we were walking through a doorway together. But I have to acknowledge I was not really making a serious proposal. I was kind of making what I thought was a somewhat jokingly outlandish proposal. And he's like, yeah, sure, let's do that. So I got lucky in two ways on that one. So in the interest of moving towards discussion, I will stop there and pass it to Elizabeth for an introduction.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, everyone. Good morning. It would be so great if you guys could turn on your video just so we feel like we're talking to someone. No pressure, though, but it's just a bunch of black right now. But of course, then you couldn't run and get your cup of coffee, but actually you could because we won't mind. I'm Elizabeth Wroblicka. I work for Conservation Works right now. I've had the good fortune in my long conservation career of working both from the conservation, Mark hasn't showered, that's okay, Mark, both from the land trust side and the government side, as well as the landowner side. I frequently advise landowners. So I sit on the board of a foundation that funds conservation projects. So I've kind of seen it from all angles. And while I recognize a common purpose in land conservation, we often have different goals depending on where you're coming from. And so when you're negotiating a deal, I think it's important from the conservation side to keep in mind that landowners are our best partners. It's something my mentor told me about 25 years ago. They voluntarily decided to, for most cases voluntarily, to give up a very valuable right in one of their most important assets, their land, and the right to do anything they want with it within reason. And so to respect that, to be gracious, to understand that they hold all the cards at the beginning, and to really, and therefore focus from your end on what's the most important, which is, protecting the natural resources, and be willing to give a little to get the deal done. And I hope that's not a controversial statement. I'm not a purist, as you might have figured out. I'm a pragmatist, probably because I work from all sides of the deal. And so the example I'd like to present is when working with the landowner, and just full disclosure, I and my partner, Gary, were the landowner. So I actually have a CR on my property, which is very interesting when you have to start thinking about, wow, I'm going to have someone tell me what to do here. And so the issue was we have it's maybe 30 acres of forest, 10 acres of pasture with some very minimal grazing, couple horses, couple chickens. So there's sort of ag permitted uses. And the holder wanted an ag plan for anything ag uses greater than 5 acres. So as I said, it's 10 acres of very minimal grazing. We, I guess, would be, we're not in the business of farming. And I guess it struck me as a requirement that seemed unnecessary. I understood where it was coming from, but in reality, it didn't make sense, especially when you contact NRCS as a non-commercial farmer, it's very difficult to and I understand it's staffing resources, to get them to sort of pay attention to you, even just to request how to deal with multiflora rose or Russian olive or poison ivy. I really couldn't get a response, and that was unrelated to the CR. So having to create a plan just to graze a couple horses was not going to work. And so I inserted the word commercial before the word ag to connote an intensity of use, which got at the issue that the holder, which happened to be the ComCom, was trying to prevent. There's a perennial stream on the property, so erosion and protection of the water. It got at that. You'd need an ag plan if you're going to increase the use to the extent where you're actually making money and farming commercially, as opposed to a permitted use that actually has no impact on the property. And so it was just a way to move the negotiation forward. It's always a balance. I know you're always thinking 3 landowners ahead. And so are landowners. They're wanting to protect their property, for longevity as well. So I guess I just offer that as focusing on what's really important and understanding that landowners are our best partners. Bob,
Great.
Turning it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And good morning, everyone. Bob Wilber, Director of Land Conservation for Mass Audubon. I started my career about the same time that Mark Robinson did. And a different way to phrase that is that the receding glacier was in Leominster at that point. So I started working for the what was then the Department of Environmental Management, now DCR, Conservation and Recreation. I was fortunate enough to be Director of Land Conservation there. I then worked for the Nature Conservancy, like Rob, a Mass chapter. And since 2000, I've been at Mass Audubon. I also want to proudly say that I am president of an all-volunteer land trust in the town of Stowe, where I live. And that's Stowe, no EE, no ski, just to be clear. And I give some thought to what I wanted to say at this segment. And I don't have a war story because, frankly, they're too long. I tend to enjoy telling them too much. So instead, what I thought I would do to try to be as helpful to this audience as I could be is to really talk about briefly use of experts, because so there are two situations. We're in a moment right now that a lot of us thought we might never see. And it's a time where funding for our work is like it's never been before. And it's only going to increase as well in the coming years. And that's because of the recognition of the importance of our work for responding to climate change, for addressing environmental justice and inequity of access issues, and human health as well. So it's really a wonderful time to be doing what we're doing. And so lots of funding available. One of the keys is, can you get to yes with the important landowners? And so let's face it, one of the most common situations that we all encounter, especially in a superheated real estate market, is a landowner that has unrealistic expectations of value. And so I've got a couple of good ideas there that have worked really well for me. One's really basic: hire good appraisers. They make your work easier getting to yes if they generate an estimate of value that is realistic, in the ballpark. It's close to what the actual value is at that moment in time. A good appraiser can also be a really valuable person in getting to yes by educating the owner. So if I have a landowner who has, I realize right off the bat, has just wildly unrealistic thoughts of what their property's worth, I always hire a very good appraiser, someone who can work with them and teach them about appraisal. And then I ask that appraiser to work very closely with that landowner. Engage them more than you engage me. It's just a very, very effective way to go. The other one that I really like is to hire a land planner before the appraiser, in that situation where someone thinks, oh, we could get 50 lots here, and you're looking at it and you're seeing vernal pools and other wetlands, and you're saying, I don't know. I'm not seeing the same thing you are. Sometimes jointly hiring a land planner to work in advance of the appraiser, again, working very closely with the owner, perhaps doing some perk testing to really take the doubt out of what could happen there. Those are some of the things that I think are very, very helpful. And I would urge you to use those if you haven't already. Rob, do I kick back to you, I think?
Well, let's just let's turn to the group at this point.
Great.
And we've had a couple folks join. It would be great if folks can put questions they may have into the chat. And we'll use the raise hand function for anyone who wants to be part of a response to one of those questions that may get raised here. But the hope is that some of you are facing particular challenges or conundra in the projects you have going at this point, and this is a great opportunity, great place, total group of people to kick that around with.
Barbara.
Hi there. So
Barbara, you look cold.
we don't have heat in our basement, and there doesn't seem to be Wi-Fi today. So, so at MLTC, we often get requests for top-notch appraisers, and I know that we have some on our website. You were mentioning, Bob, that it's important to get an appraiser or land planner. Any ideas where there's a list of top-notch ones, or?
Well, as you surely know, at one point we had a fairly robust list of vendors on the MLTC site. We might want to dust that off again and update it.
Okay, so I can get back to you, and so we can help other people, right?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay,
But in terms of a land planner, and I hope I'm not interrupting your flow, But land planner, just to be clear, I realized that it might not have been completely clear what I was talking about. So it's a civil engineer usually, and it's someone who can really approach the development potential of the property from a very factual way, looking at frontage and wetlands and so on, the regulatory overlay for it. And really, as I said, take the doubt or the debate out of it. And it really, especially if there's perk testing that's included in that, can really determine pretty definitively how many lots actually could be supported on that property. And appraisers love to do appraisals of properties where they have the advantage of a land plan in advance of their work.
Thank you.
I agree, though. Getting the vendor list on the coalition website a little updated would be great. It's been a little while, but there was some conversation, a few months ago about trying to do that and have it be not just kind of vendors volunteering to be on there, but kind of having members adding vendors so that you're actually getting a bit of a looking for a better word than curated, a curated list of vendors that your colleagues, so it's people that your colleagues in the field have had some good experience with.
Yeah.
Bob, maybe you could respond to Mark's question, appraising. How do you know that any given appraiser has a handle on the market in your area when the market is so hot and in flux, I'll add?
Well, it's a good question, certainly. And I guess my approach would be to hire an appraiser who, number one, is most of their work involves raw land appraisal. That's an important one. There are a lot of appraisers out there. Many of them rarely do raw land appraisals. So that's start with that. And then number two is the obvious one. Make sure that they have a lot of experience in your particular corner of the market. Because we all know it varies a bit from one part of the state to the other in terms of what's going on at that moment.
I would add to that just that in a hot market, appraisers are always looking backward, right? They have to look at recent comparable sales. That is data, however. They are looking, the landowner doesn't really have any data that the appraiser doesn't have. What the landowner has is a hope and a wish and a belief, perhaps, that the market is skyrocketing beyond what any data could possibly show. And that's a tough one to overcome, right? That's not a data question, that's a belief. And so there's no magic bullet for any of these things, but continuing to tie the conversation back to data. And I've often asked landowners, I hear you're saying you think that's too low. Help me understand what you are seeing happening in the marketplace that makes this number not valid, not sufficient in a real way. And there are often folks have answers. It's not like you stump them and they fold like a tent, but it does get them thinking another way if they have to kind of rationalize what is essentially
Yeah, I would say digging into the actual appraisal, looking at the comparable sales. Often the landowner is quite familiar with the comps that are pulled, 20 acres on this street, 20 acres in that town over. And you can have a conversation with the landowner as well as the appraiser. Why did you use these? Why did you use these comps? What about this one? That it is a science. It's factual in that those are real properties that have real sale prices, but whether or not they equate to the actual property you're appraising is the debate. And, that's the question for the appraiser as well as the landowner. So I've had those sorts of conversations and concluded that the appraisal was wrong. It was too low. And we hired a different appraiser and it came in much higher. The comps were just way off. they weren't comparable.
Yeah, as has appeared in the chat, appraisals are not art. Well, I'll paraphrase. They're not art or science. You know, they're too
Yeah.
ugly to be art and they're too inaccurate to be science. So, yeah, but they are expert opinion is really what an appraisal is. It's an expert opinion, which is an indication of market value, not, you know, a fact of market value.
And another point I would add to that, Rob, you know, as a good appraiser will remind you occasionally that their estimate of value is landing on a point within the range of value. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And so it's the comparables, it's the adjustments, if they're making adjustments that determine where they land on that range. But there's usually some movement there. If you feel that their appraisal is low, have a conversation with them before you meet with the landowner. If you just, your gut is telling you this is not an accurate appraisal, talk to the appraiser and talk about how they might be comfortable settling higher on the range.
You know, and I'm as cheap as the next person, but it is often true that the properties that we are looking at to conserve have something that makes them a little special from the sort of commodity comparable property. And so, you know, it is what every seller hopes for is maybe a little bit more likely to be true in many of the properties we're involved in, which is that a buyer would come along and fall in love with it and pay a little bit too much to have it, right? So that's kind of what every seller is hoping for. It certainly is a part of the market. So to some degree, it's embedded in the data. But, you know, it may be that those top 3 comparable sales in the appraisal are really more kind of average properties, whereas the one that you're trying to secure for conservation is really a bit more special in a sort of, you know, a bit of a more amorphous kind of way. Well, we may come back to appraisals, but I want to move on to another question. Felicia's asking, what are strategies for when you have to work through a broker, making it so difficult to build a relationship with the landowner? Explain the benefits of working with your organization, etc. Elizabeth, do you want to start off there? Or?
Sure. So working with real estate brokers, which is actually something we've all dealt with when buying a house, as well as dealing with open land. So real estate brokers, where are they coming from? They're coming from their commission, just to be blunt, and they often want the deal to happen no matter what, regardless, rather than not have it happen. So, you know, a lower price, etc., different conditions, etc. So, and the broker is not like an attorney in that when someone has a broker, you are still allowed to speak with the landowner. So it's not a, you know, attorney-client privilege situation where you're not supposed to speak with the landowner, though. I guess if it's you know, I guess you sort of respect the landowner's wishes if they want you to only deal with the broker. So I'm not really understanding that situation, but let's say it is just the broker. So real estate agents and brokers used to be one of our target audience for education about conservation, because we figured they had a lot of contact with land when it would come up, and they could think, oh, let me contact the land trust. Maybe they'll be interested in buying this. So they can be friendly. And you can work with a broker over multiple deals, you know, over a period of time. They get to know you and your organization. So they're professionals who are interested in a commission, and they stand to gain by building a relationship with you as potential buyers of land that they have to sell. So Felicia, so tell us, is there a specific issue going on?
No, not necessarily. So as many of you know, I'm new to doing actual land deals. I came from the stewardship side of things. And, you know, I just have a project going on right now that I'm just talking to the broker. The landowner does not wish to talk to us. It's just through the broker, and, you know, explaining, you know, the negotiated value, or, you know, why the appraisal comes in as it does, to the broker and then feeling like that message is maybe being lost when it goes to the landowner, and just wishing I could sit down at the table with the landowner and talk through it. So it's really just about feeling like the message is being lost through the broker, because the broker feels like, no, we can get more for this property. So I question whether they're telling my message to the landowner. So that's really just the challenge that I'm seeing.
Yeah, a couple of things jump out in that to my ear. One, you said that the landowner wants you working through the broker. So that actually makes it more challenging for you, because often it's the broker who wants to be in the middle. And as Elizabeth said, they're often working for the commission. So in that situation where I'm not sure, but so far I'm only talking to the broker. I have said to a broker, introductory conversation, blah, blah, blah. Here's why we're interested. I want you to be assured that, we understand you have a contractual relationship with landowner. We have no interest in working around that or outside of that, and just trying to really put that issue to bed. We are not here to do an end run. But, in our experience, we have really found it beneficial for all of us to be able to talk together. And so, trying to get a conversation with the landowner and the broker. So you get, you're not cutting the broker out of the scene, even in an interactive way. That may be helpful. But it sounds, often I think landowners, it's terrifying to try and sell one of your, perhaps your largest sole asset. And so they're relying on the professionalism of their broker to kind of protect them. That's tough. But I think, again, maybe through the broker, you could try to get a three-party conversation. And that way the person, yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I would just add that it's unethical for a broker not to communicate accurately, to withhold information or intentionally misconstrue it. So perhaps putting it in writing, a letter, to the broker, for the broker to communicate, they're required to report to the landowner everything that you say. So, but you can do that in a nice way.
And that's also a good way to introduce yourself to the landowner, is a written thing through the broker. And, just maybe the first one isn't very focused on negotiations. It's focused on introducing yourself and your organization, and just, I've also been very explicit in not just in the broker situation, but just trying to get a conversation going, to say to a landowner or a broker and landowner, hey, let's have a conversation. We can have a ground rule that we are not going to agree to anything in that particular conversation. Let's get together and talk and float ideas. Anything that anyone says, they can back away from. I think there's a lot of almost fear, at a low level fear, that someone's going to trap themselves in a bad deal, and just trying to release that stuff to try to get the conversation flowing is really an important early step.
So I have a couple thoughts. Felicia, what you're describing, it does make it more challenging. It can often make it more challenging having a broker involved. There's no question about it. And while I agree, ethically, they do have an obligation to relay. I like the idea of communicating in writing. It makes it less possible for them to frame it in a negative light, because that's often what happens. Let's face it, because they're motivated by commission, they really dislike bargain sales. And, that's the bread and butter of our work, is part cash, part tax compensation as part of the getting TS. And I think it's really important to push for, politely, push for direct meetings with the owner. If the broker needs to be there as well, fine. But I think it's really, really important not to if you can possibly avoid communicating everything through the broker, your chances are just so much greater. The other thing I would say is if you're working with an important landowner and they're headed towards listing their property, talk to them about including a provision in there for either a reduced commission or no commission if the sale is for conservation in the end. Many landowners are willing to do that. And it's a simple step, but can make, again, make getting to yes a lot easier.
Mark Robinson adds in the chat that you might also think about retaining a buyer broker for yourself. Mark's words, not mine, to knock some sense into the seller's broker. We actually did that on a project this past winter or fall. And the buyer broker we hired, we hired Jim Monahan from Landvest as a buyer's broker. He's a broker, he's an appraiser, he lives and breathes the market where we were working. And we got so much value out of that, and the seller ended up paying his bill as part of the brokerage commission at the end of the deal. So I think that's actually, in the right situation, that can be a really good way. But the more skill set your buyer broker can bring to the table, the more valuable that approach is, I would suggest.
So a couple of things, I guess a little different for a state agency to hire a broker. But
Fair enough.
The other, in thinking, I always try to think about what is the broker concerned about. In addition to their commission, they're also concerned about, they probably have a 6-month listing agreement, or perhaps a year of getting cut out of the deal. It's between them and the landowner, the seller, to get paid. Eliminating the fear of a workaround, as Rob indicated, and sort of maybe copying them on emails, or just making sure they feel included. So they're going to at least be aware when the deal's getting ready to close. They can be helpful in taking care of a lot of seller obligations, a lot of the groundwork. A buyer's broker means, less of a commission for seller's broker. So the seller's broker has less of an inclination to market it to an entity that has a buyer's broker. Not usually there is a buyer's broker, so it's sort of, maybe it's a wash. But I guess I would say getting to the point where you are communicating directly with the landowner, at least including the landowner and the broker together, would probably be my goal. So it's brokers clear they're going to get paid. They're happy to not have to do much work. You're going to do all the work. You want to talk to the landowner. So it's a very different situation than residential sales, which is what the brokers primarily used to. And so, so keeping in mind that they just don't want to be cut out of their commission and somehow have the landowner close without them knowing it.
So moving to a new question, Andrew is asking to hear some comments about dealing with the different contours, negotiating with families or other groups where there is a diversity of opinion on the other side of the table, and any tips on how to approach that. Bob, do you want to start in?
Sure. Again, in that situation, anytime where you have different opinions, different perspectives, people aren't on the same page. I always lean towards how can I make this exercise as factual as it possibly can be, and how can I include, especially the ones that are skeptical or uninformed, include them so they can be educated through the process. So again, it's land planner is often very helpful in a situation like that. It makes your appraisal quite a bit more expensive, but it's almost always worth it in the end. It can be a very helpful way of getting those siblings, for instance, who maybe don't like each other. How often? We see that all the time. And disagree with each other. It sort of takes it out of their internal debate and brings it as a factual exercise where those experts can help get them onto the same page, develop a common baseline.
So what I do is I first determine who's the ultimate decision maker, meaning whose name is on the deed. Sometimes it's the elderly parents, and it's the 4 kids that you're working with, though it's the parents, and maybe the parents don't agree on the conservation outcomes versus outright sale for development, and then the kids often disagree, just to I guess use a common scenario without generalizing. So Andrew, if you could maybe give a specific, but so determining who the decision maker is, and yes, absolutely be factual, and sort of providing the factual data. There's this tax credit program, there's a federal income tax deduction, there's we can do a bargain sale, you could do a CR, you could do it in fee. Here are the organizations you could work with, all that sort of stuff. It takes a couple conversations, and then I go away and I sort of let them talk amongst themselves. And we almost always something rises to the top as the common goal really is conservation. But then you realize they own property, the parents actually own property over here, and so they're worried about estate taxes, and so it gets more convoluted, and they need to you have to send them to an estate tax attorney. So there's a sort of family dynamic thing, but it's their life issues that you're also working with. But what bubbles up is the decision maker. Maybe one of the kids is really sort of more outspoken. The other ones are sort of willing. Once they kind of work it out amongst themselves and come back to you, because you need to be dealing with the decision maker. It's unfair to you to try to keep coming up with solutions, and they keep moving the goalposts on you. So you need come back to me with what your goals are, and I can help you meet those goals without influencing them in deciding what those goals are. It might be conservation is not the ultimate goal, and they go away. So you're not trying to convince them. You're just trying to figure out what's the goal here, and then I'll help you work toward it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Listening for what is kind of behind what they are saying. I don't know about you folks. I'm not sure I've ever had an argument with a family member where I was actually arguing about the thing that was driving the argument, right? I mean, you're arguing about, the menu for a holiday dinner, but what you're really arguing about is, something that happened 20 years ago. So that's probably happening in that family. And so trying to, they may well be presenting the point of conflict as value, or timing or something, or one of them has kids as a next generation and another one doesn't, and how's that value going to be, how to play out. That may be what the issue is, and you actually do need to respond to the issue they're presenting to you. But I just think there's so much value to trying to listen past that. You're not going to resolve their family struggle, the emotional struggle, but you can, that's part of the moving goalpost thing that Elizabeth mentioned, I think, is often because the goalpost they're showing you is not the goalpost that they're really trying to address. So, you can only be family therapist to a certain degree, but that is part of the job, is at least on the listening part, and, listening beyond what they're saying, and trying to get to where they're actually coming from. But one other thing I want to add to it is, we are all so focused on getting the deal done. It may not be ready. Right. That family may not be ready to do a deal at that time. And so finding ways to step back from a negotiation so that so that you remain their first call when they are a little more ready. So you're not like, I'm out of here. You guys aren't ready to do this. I'm not going to waste my, which none of us would do, but to really try and set the stage for a future conversation, but without a timeline. And say, we've had a lot of good discussion here. I'm going to leave you guys to think about all of this, and let's check in 4 months or 6 months or whatever it is. So sometimes recognizing that you're just pouring in bad time after good is maybe the right move. Also, leaving a conversation is pretty powerful. It can be a bit of a wake up to the other side if they actually are wanting to get somewhere and they just can't figure out how to get out of their own way to do that. You know, a kind and polite, you guys aren't there yet, can help them on their side realize that they really, if any of them really want this to happen, they got to get organized.
Yeah, so the this is a really interesting topic, and it's a very common one, and it will become even more common as special properties get passed on within families. And so one of the key skills, which has been mentioned, Rob and Elizabeth both mentioned it, it's listening. And so if you're in a situation where there are multiple family members with divergent opinions, do a lot of listening and observing. And sometimes there is a member there, as Elizabeth said, happens to be the outspoken one, may not be the decision maker, but that's an important person that you need to address as part of proceeding forward. And a lot of times if you do the careful listening and observing, you realize that for one particular person, it's not about money. There's another aspect of the outcome that is agitating them. And if you can find a way to address that, sort of go into it, be your best middle child, kind of listening to all the people around the table and try to pick up, what does this person want? What does this person want? So.
Yeah, and not to, I mean, not this, I don't mean this sort of in contrast to Elizabeth, your comment about make sure you know who the decision maker is, because that is key. You need to know who has the authority to convey the land interest. But often in a family, the person, like Bob was just saying, the person who's talking the most may not be that person with the authority to convey. But the person with the authority to convey may not ever sign on the line unless there's kind of agreement within the family. And so the legal interest holder may not actually be the decision maker, right? The group may be the decision maker, or some other influential family member, may be the decision maker, even though they're not on the deed. And so trying to get a sense of those dynamics to the extent you can as an outsider who has very limited and kind of compartmentalized interactions with the family. It's tough, but useful.
Also, so that's correct. There is someone who sort of bubbles up as the outspoken one, but I guess what I also meant by the person who owns the property is their issues, the tax ramifications from the sale, or from conservation in terms of the use of the property, who factor into the sort of factual discussion that you're going to present to them. And I'm just going to say this, I'm very protective of older landowners who have adult children with conflicting opinions. I just instinctively look out for the parents, even though they're the quiet ones on the Zoom call. And I just think that's important.
Bob, you're muted.
Thanks, Rob. My dog was just right behind me and I was concerned she'd bark. There was a project I worked on years ago where there was such family tension between siblings that we realized that to have effective negotiations, we literally had to have separate and parallel discussions, and we would literally schedule them on the same day and do mirror sessions because they couldn't be in the same room. When they did get in the same room together, that became a huge impediment to getting the deal done. Their tensions between each other. And Rob, what you said before, it's about something 20 years ago. And that was absolutely the case here. And And that was what ended up being one of the most effective ideas we came up with is let's do separate meetings. And it took us a while to realize.
Yeah, I actually, Phil Truesdell and I at the state many years ago worked on a project. Two brothers, older guys, two brothers had quit speaking to each other long ago, so they were working through their attorneys. And eventually their attorneys stopped speaking to each other. And that was when we decided this situation is not, is not ready for a productive outcome. So, you know, hard to know. Let's see, new question. Jan is asking, we've talked about the roles of appraisers and brokers. What would you ideally find in a good surveyor beyond timeliness? I'll say beyond timeliness and accuracy, but the first thing that comes to my mind on that is that surveyors keep records forever. And so you might just be looking for a surveyor either who has worked on other properties that came out of that same long ago chain of title, because they will have already done a lot of the hard research. Surveyors, you know, we think of surveyors out on the ground shooting lines and marking flags, but that's the last step in a longer process. They are deed researchers and interpreters of the vaguest language to be found. And, you know, the good ones are also ecologists who might be able to tell where that chestnut tree, you know, was 120 years ago. So, so I think but the key one I would say is looking for folks who may have file information that will be useful in the project. And that doesn't only mean that they surveyed that property before. If you got that, then go with that person. But either someone who has surveyed adjacent properties, because again, they'll already have made decisions about where some of those lines fall, or someone who has surveyed other properties that have a common title history somewhere way back. And recommendations from, you know, folks in the community where you work.
So I would pick up on one of the things you said, because which is somebody who enjoys historical sleuthing, because that can be invaluable on a gnarly survey. Somebody who is willing to, you know, go look through the town meeting minutes or the county road records, or try to figure out where that chestnut tree was all that time ago. It varies a lot. Some of them really enjoy that and are really remarkably good at it. And then the last idea I would suggest is consider having go-to surveyors where you have a lot of interaction with them. They get to know you, you get to know them. And you develop a really good, solid relationship. That can be very, very helpful. It can also help get you some favorable rates over time if they see that you're giving them quite a bit of business.
So I would add, yes, I love the surveyors who can decipher that arcane deed language and turn it into a actual survey on the ground. Very impressive. What I value most is accuracy. In my surveyors, I've had an instance where I needed to invited the two surveyors with conflicting opinions on a common boundary line to sit down together and look at the surveys and figure it out. The issue was there was a pile of rocks that one surveyor had taken as a monument, and a subsequent survey done by someone who knew the whole section of the area of town, found other evidence, and who knows who put that pile of rocks there, perhaps maliciously or not, but it was not the boundary marker. It was not a boundary marker. It was a pile of rocks. And so it actually had a huge effect on a boundary. So the second surveyor was able to explain how they arrived at the correct boundary. And so I think unlike appraisal, surveys are fact-based. And there's a correct survey and there's an incorrect survey. So getting it right is probably the most important thing to me. They do get it wrong every now and then.
Mhm.
And Jen put this in the question, but timeliness is no joke. I worked with a surveyor for many years who owned all the records for that area. It was the go-to surveyor, and it was tough. It was more expensive and more work to go to someone else, but he never delivered on time. And we would look for, in any given project, we'd say, okay, who else could we go to on this one? Is there any good? Can we rationalize our way into someone else? So timeliness is definitely a piece of it. There is some interpretation, and sometimes you actually get down to the point of needing a boundary line agreement, where you basically have to go to the neighboring landowner and agree on a line in a formal way. So having a surveyor who is a little user-friendly can also help in kind of those most vague situations, so that have them check in with you once they've done their research before they're heading to the field to see whether there are issues that are worth chewing over. That's something we didn't really talk about in the context of appraisers, but it's really important there. It's like, you don't just want the report from the appraiser. Talking to them before they, when they've done their research and before they reach a conclusion, is a good point to kind of see what they're learning, where they're trending. You get to ask a few pointed questions that the landowner might bring up that your appraiser isn't necessarily thinking about. It's not going to swing the value probably, but at least if they can address that question in their report, then you get to hold it up and point to the expert opinion rather than having to answer it yourself. So I think that's true with the surveyor as well. It can be good to touch in with them along the way on certain kinds of really vague projects. Often all we want is that accurate, timely piece of Mylar to close the project.
Yeah. If you have a big survey assignment, a big property, a large property, one consideration that's important is, what is the size of the crew that they have? Is this a one-person show? Because that's going to impact your delivery date. And Felicia knows this because we work together on it, but at Bear Hole, 1,400 acres, 13 miles of perimeter boundary. The surveyor that Jen Soper, who oversaw that part of it and did a really terrific job of that, hired a surveyor that was actually going to put 2 crews on it, starting at different points and meeting. And it worked beautifully, and it was on time, and it was done really well. So think about that part of it too, especially if you have a big property that is going to take some time.
Sally mentions in the chat that on conservation restriction projects, working with a surveyor who has dealt with CRs and kind of understands what that is helpful too. Good. Often on a CR, we're not just looking for a perimeter survey, like we need just to convey a piece of land. That CR survey may have, differing zones of different intensities of use or kinds of use that want reflected on the plan. So working with somebody who kind of understands that element can be beneficial on that side.
Has anyone had any CR negotiation issues lately with the landowner? Just curious what the issues are out there. I've had a few based on our new model. One thing, it's funny because I know I've talked about this issue with several of you in other contexts. It's the new deemed denied language. So in our notice paragraph, we say to a landowner, if you're going to do something that we're going to allow, but we want to make sure you do it correctly or in the right location, you have to give us notice. And we may also want approval over that. And if we don't get back to you in 60 days, some CRs used to say it's approved. If you haven't heard from us, go ahead and do it. And I will say, and I'm making that sound a little flippant, but I will say that tends to be, if you look at zoning bylaws, when you need to notify a government entity, a regulatory oversight authority, it is deemed approved. They have it sort of would be kind of like that unfunded mandate. You can't require that you get approval from a government entity and just have the government entity never get back to you from a landowner's perspective. It's not fair. I guess it's a slightly different context with private land conservation, with the landowner working with a nonprofit. So the issue is the IRS has said, well, if it's deemed approved automatically and the land trust hasn't responded, we lost it in the mail, we went on vacation, we missed it. It's not protected in perpetuity because it could be something significant. It's an exercise of a reserved right that could harm the conservation values. So we require for when you're submitting it to the IRS for a federal income tax deduction, that it's a deemed denied. So landowner does everything right. They get in touch with you. They wait 60 days. They haven't heard from you, is denied. How do you talk to a landowner about that? Does that seem fair? What are some negotiations that could, upset a landowner to the point where it might blow the deal? I don't know. I don't want to be alarmist, but I just wanted to sort of toss that out. I know what I would say. I know how I feel about it, but I just wanted to throw that out. How do you all think about that in terms of a negotiation issue?
Especially when it's not a deduction situation, right? When you can't sort of blame the IRS for needing to have that.
Right. So that's one tactic. You can always blame the IRS. And we often say, true, it's not a tax deductible CR, but we have one model. And as a land trust, we strive to meet the higher bar. Massachusetts, we try to comply for various reasons: standards of practices, accreditation, signature of the secretary, nonprofit laws, etc.
And just consistency in the land trust responsibilities from one CR to the next, right? If they have opposite terms, it's hard to, you got to do a lot of catching up at every moment. But yes, back to your question, Elizabeth.
Yeah, could we lose a deal? Is it worth losing a deal over? Or other issues that a landowner is going to walk on. For example, an amendment. They want an amendment and you'd like to update the language to improve the CR. Landowner says, no, I just want to amend this little piece of it, but I want to keep my 1990 language because I really like the 2 pages. No, we're going to make it 26 pages now just because you opened up this amendment can of worms. Nope, I just want to do the amendment is actually a good thing. You want the amendment because it's going to eliminate a building envelope or do something to improve the CR from your perspective, but you'd also like to get it to be a much better document in your opinion. But the landowner says, no, I just want to wipe out the building envelope. What do? You go forward? No, they're going to walk if you insist. You've got EEA signature you still need. Does the landowner hold all the cards in this circumstance? I think they do.
As in all of our negotiations, the landowner holds a lot of important cards. So yeah, it becomes that, is this a good enough outcome? And Elizabeth, I'm sure you are, as I am, thinking of a project that you helped us on quite recently in a CR amendment to extinguish some building envelopes, and they would not do a restated, complete update of the CR to match the state model. They just wanted to amend this elderly CR. And yeah, ultimately we decided we were getting enough progress, enough improvement in the conservation outcome to justify not getting everything we wanted. Well, there was one other thing that came to my mind, and anything else I don't want to end that. Other thoughts on the CR negotiation particularly with the new model? I guess Mark must have left. He always has something to say. The other thing that we were talking about the kind of generic, well, the common, disparate opinions among the landowner family or group. Or even just a more generic, broader question of when the negotiations are a bit stuck for whatever reason. We talked a lot about the dynamic on the family side of the table, but I wanted to just suggest that there are times when the dynamic on our side of the table may be part of the issue. And, part of our role is to kind of present ourselves to the landowner and into the negotiation in a way that facilitates the deal and moves the conversation forward. But it is also sometimes just the case that I may not be the right person to talk with that landowner or group of landowners. And sometimes the best way to unstick a situation is for us on the land trust side to bring in a colleague and alter the dynamic in that way from our side of the table. So that is just another kind of tool in the toolbox of how to shift the dynamic around an ongoing negotiation. So that
I have an
came to
example.
mind afterwards, but yeah, Elizabeth.
So Lindsay might be aware of this. We had a rather difficult, large forested landowner that we were negotiating a huge forest legacy project on. And myself and a land agent were the primary point person, and the landowner who held all the cards was several thousands of acres that we really wanted. Basically said, no, I don't want to talk to you two anymore. Bring in that nice lady that I met once, Christy. She's really sweet. I want to just talk to her. And, and then went around, went to a board member, who had no idea what she was talking about, or just, went up the chain to, someone within this agency, someone who doesn't do. So the landowner completely threw our little, this is how we negotiate deals wide open. And we had to kind of, okay, so you're going to talk to the difficult landowner, and then you turn around and ask us, okay, so what should the wording of that paragraph be? And we'll tell you, and then you tell the landowner, and the landowner will think you made it up, or, it's just so, oh my God. But we did it, and we got the deal done, and it was very important for conservation. So eye on the prize, it was multiple years of a very difficult negotiation, totally swallowing your pride, like, I know the answer to this. I'm the one who should be. No, it's like, nope, she doesn't want to talk to me. She walked out of the room on me. So I'm done. Yeah.
Yeah, change of personnel can be the move.
And it might not be your fault, I guess is what I'm saying. It's the landowner.
Or your choice.
Right, or your choice. You can't always be bubbly.
Yeah, I had one just recently, actually, where the landowner and I were really butting heads, and I could tell that was going to be a problem. And one of the conservation partners mentioned to me that this particular landowner acted differently with males and females, and that he was very confrontational with me, and that's just the way he interacted with other males. And so we made a decision to shift, and it was very helpful. I stepped back from being the point for the negotiations, and I think that ended up being pivotal in terms of getting to yes. It did hurt my feelings a little bit.
Yeah, right. But you have to take one for the team, as I was told.
Exactly. I can tell you're over it, Elizabeth, really.
No, actually, the landowner who is female, and we were all female, the first request was, where's Craig? I want to talk to Craig, who's my predecessor, Craig McDonnell. And I'm like, he's retired. Like, he was way better than you are.
Yeah. Well, we are running down on time, but there is one last topic in the chat that we can hopefully address briefly. Where to go? Here we go. So any thoughts about the new CR language around Indigenous people's uses of the CR property? I'll just note that in the new state model, there is language that allows again, it's language that as a CR drafter, you get to adapt, include, not include, but we wanted it as part of the initial consideration for all CRs, addresses as a retained right, the ability to allow Indigenous peoples to engage in cultural practices on the land with certain constraints, as any drafter might modify those constraints. So that is there in the model. I see it as a growing issue. Sally Nazer, who's on the call here, we have a property, a CR at the trustees holds a CR on private land that just changed hands and was acquired by an Indigenous, well, in combination with an Indigenous group and a farming-based nonprofit. And we are, we're just starting this. Transaction is just, a few months old, but we are anticipating, how are we going to interpret this set of traditional CR, traditional, curious word here, of Western land use framed CR retained rights, permitted uses, when working with a landowner that is interested in using the land in a very different way. And, we certainly want to be supportive of that use. We need to be cognizant of the commitments we have as a steward of that, of the CR on that land. Yes, it's a 1975 CR. So, will we amend? Will we interpret? I think it's, it's going to be an intriguing conversation and one that we're kind of eager to have. We're fortunate at trustees to have an engagement with a ongoing consultant advisor on relationships with Indigenous groups. And I think, that would be very helpful to us in that particular context. But, even something as, not allowing for additional residences. Well, one, frame house, and how do you equate X number of WE2s to that? What is appropriate and what is reasonable? And, to what extent do you stretch the envelope of what we were thinking in 1975 to address this new ownership situation at this moment in history? Other thoughts from folks on or off the panel as you're encountering those kinds of issues?
So I recall when we were writing that section of the model, one of the purposes behind it was to just educate landowners to the possibility that they might want to consider, like a recreational use easement, public access easement, all different ways a landowner can open their property that does not conflict with the conservation values. And so it was sort of meant as a education tool, one. It's up to the landowner to open their property. And the land trust has basically said, we would approve this if you decided to do that. The other would be a cultural access easement that probably many of you have heard of. Mark Robinson has one he's worked on with Dennis Land Trust, and which is sort of like akin to a license agreement where you let a person or entity onto your property to hunt, fish, in this case, gather, ceremonial practices, grasses, basket making, that sort of thing. So it's an agreement that's revocable because it's a license, but it's another way a private landowner we can expand access to land for Indigenous peoples without needing to address the ownership question, because most of the land is in private ownership.
Mm-hmm.